Hi, Kristen.
Hello.
Out to go live.
Awesome.
Hey everyone, my name is Angelica Rubio, representative for District 35, and it is Thursday, 6 o'clock, and this is the beginning of my last town hall meeting for the week. It's been fun, it's been great, and it's been exhausting all at the same time, but I am super humbled to be able to do this work. Excuse me because I am dog sitting tonight. So there's like 4 dogs in my house. So if something goes wrong, we can just blame it on the animals. Tonight, I have the privilege of talking about 2 very important pieces of legislation that I'm carrying. One of which is related to healthy food financing, and then another is related to a pharmaceutical board that we are wanting to create, and to prevent drug price gouging here in the state of New Mexico. And so we'll talk about that in the second half hour. But for tonight, I want to introduce Kristen Aguilar, who is with La Semilla Food Center. And a few years ago, we met, and it's been a really great relationship to have, especially here in Southern New Mexico when we have such amazing work, um, uh, especially in organizing and advocacy. And the coalition just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it's really how we were able to meet around the work that we do around racial justice and economic justice. And so I'm really excited to have Kristen here. Kristen, this has been just a really informal conversation with folks. So one, introduce yourself, let people know how awesome you are, and then let's talk about healthy food financing.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here. Good to see everybody. So I am co-executive director at La Semilla Food Center. I've been with this super exciting and amazing organization for 10 years almost now, so maybe 9. It's been a while. And I started as a policy coordinator. I'm now co-executive director. We have a shared leadership model, which I think gives us a lot of strength as an organization and kind of plays into a lot of the justice and equity work that we do. I have 2 kids. I've lived in Las Cruces here since 2009 when I came here for graduate school, and born and raised in New Mexico, eastern New Mexico, in Portales. So also from that eastern side of the state, migrated south. Yeah, and so at La Semilla, we really focus on local food and farm systems. We work in the Paso del Norte region specifically. So a lot of our work is, on the New Mexico side, but also down into El Paso. So we also do some policy work at the federal level as well. And we have 5 different programs and 22 staff members who are doing amazing things. We really focus on hiring youth and folks from our community and really cultivating a lot of capacity here in the region. And so we're really focused on economic justice, right? Like in addition to food justice, because that's where real change is going to come from. And we're able to use food as this lens and this tool to really advance racial and gender healing, right? And racial and gender justice. So what's really exciting is to be able to look at this thing that we all do all the time, which is eat, this thing that connects us, that brings us together. It's one of the things that, even if we don't agree on anything else, you're going to agree with somebody, right, on if it's red or green, or the best way to make tortillas, or flour or corn tortillas are better, right? Like, so we have all of these things that end up connecting us in ways that kind of transcends politics or policy sometimes. So it's a really fantastic tool. And it's something that if we're lucky, we get to do it every day. And so I'm really excited to talk more about the HFFA today, because I think it's an amazing policy piece that can change things tremendously in so many different levels, from health to supporting our local small farmers to focusing on economic diversification in our state. There's just so many wins with this policy. So I'm really excited about that.
No, thanks, Kristen. And for folks who are watching, I think it's important for everyone to understand that when I, as a legislator, am proposing legislation, especially in times like these, like I'm very intentional about what I'm sponsoring and what I'm going to spend my time, especially when we're unpaid legislators who don't have a whole lot of free time, especially with many of us who work full time. So for me, this Healthy Food Financing Act was very, very important because, as folks know as well, I grew up in the southeastern part of the state of New Mexico in the Pecos Valley, just between Artesia and Roswell, and my parents are both farm workers. And so for me, this is a very important piece of why there's, in terms of the values behind this legislation, like that's why I stand so firmly on this effort. And while the technical pieces are still something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, like every other piece of policy that I'm carrying, I'm really excited to share this space with La Semilla and others who have been working very, very hard on this piece of legislation. For context for folks, Kristen and I presented a version of this legislation 2 years ago when I was still like this little, I mean, I feel like a freshman still in the legislature. Half the time I don't know what I'm doing still. But we initially had this conversation 2 years ago, and we got a lot of really good, positive responses from legislators, especially well, on both sides of the aisle, and that was really exciting. It was really the mechanisms that that were drafted that just weren't ready for what many legislators call prime time. And so over the course of the last 2 years, La Semilla and others have been working super diligently to try to get to where we are today. And so I think we are in a really good spot to not only introduce this legislation next week, but also to really see it have some really great debates in the House, and making it across, or make in the House and in the Senate, because we're still just so folks know, Senator elect Carrie Hamlin is going to be the primary sponsor in the Senate, and we're also talking to some other folks to help us navigate that whole process in the Senate, and then bring it over to the House, where we hope to pass it and have it signed by the governor before the end of the session. And so, Kristen, yeah, let's hear more about this Healthy Food Financing Act, because I think it's really exciting for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of those things that whenever you hear Healthy Food Financing Initiative or a Healthy Food Financing Act, which it is now, it's a lot of words and sometimes they get meaningless, right? What is important to remember is that it essentially establishes a fund, and this fund is supported by technical assistance, by and rooted in equity and justice, right? But the essential part of it is that you're really focusing on funding market-based opportunities to advance food access in our underserved communities. So essentially, this will establish a fund that provides low interest loans, forgivable loans, or grants to anybody along the food chain, small farmers who are doing production, food hubs who are working with several small farmers, farmer cooperatives, retail outlets like grocery stores, our small corner stores. All of these people are working to get healthy food and healthy local food into our communities. So anybody along that value chain would be able to apply to these funds to get their food into our communities. And so the focus of it is really on one, that job creation and that economic stimulation from the ground up, really focusing on our BIPOC communities, our Black, Indigenous, Latinx, other people, persons of color, right, like in our communities, to really water that innovation that exists in our communities. The reason we're so focused too on this justice and equity piece is that there's been so much inequity built into our current food system. So this is very easy to trace if you look at like the USDA, for example, where we've had several lawsuits against the USDA that farmers of color have won that are rooted in discriminatory practices. So we had Black farmers, Latinx farmers being discriminated against for decades at the USDA. And so all of a sudden you have, more privileged communities able to farm, able to own land, and able to do that. So what we're really looking at doing by focusing on this justice and equity piece is to let's bring everything back to par, right? Let's make sure that all of our BIPOC farmers and food hub operations who are really doing this community-based work are able to feed their communities, because it really comes back to we have the knowledge and the wisdom and the ability to do that. It's just that access to capital has been denied for so long, along racial lines often. And so you have these like gross disparities that are happening. So what we also know, right, that New Mexico is just continually coming out with really terrible statistics around childhood hunger. I think COVID has really brought that to light even more. It's always been an issue, but it's just really highlighted even more how disparate it is. And so if we're focusing on, we're able to use food, right, to stimulate the economy and the growth for like families and communities and small farmers. And at the same time, that's going to get more healthy foods into those communities. So it's this really fantastic tool that ends up hitting all of these points that really need support. So it's this really fantastic way to really flip the script on how we think about economic development in the states. And it's also a program or iterations of it have existed, for a little over a decade in several other states. At least 12 other states have them. Several cities have them, or counties. So this isn't some new and untested idea, but we're also making sure it's going to work for New Mexico by making sure that we're understanding the very rural nature of a lot of our state, that we're understanding and really focusing on, the diversity in our state. So we're really excited about this and really, really, really hopeful for this session to see some movement on it.
Yeah. No, thanks. And that's the one thing that I think is really critical for folks to understand. And I think you hit on it, is that we do have, unfortunately, in New Mexico, some really tough statistics that we've had to endure, especially when it comes to child well-being and the amount of children that go to bed hungry at night. And I think we tend to also focus on like the politics of that, and instead of really understanding like how we actually got here. And we got here because of a lot of these historical systemic issues that so many folks have endured, particularly the Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, who have been really the focus. And when we're talking about a state where we're considered like a minority majority state, um, it's even that much more critical that we address these issues head on and being unapologetic about how we do it, because we the circumstances that we find ourselves in are not by accident. Like they are designed to work this way, and this tool is one of many in which we are trying to really course correct and really um, get back to our to really like leveling that playing field for everyone. And so I think for us, for me, especially with this legislation, it's very important to me in terms of my own values, but also in terms of as we're talking about economic diversification and how we um, move away from not only just extractive industries but exploitative industries as well, that that profit off of people, on the backs of people, off of our profiting off of our land and our water and our air. Like this is another way of really creating an opportunity for a new way of actually creating a new economy for New Mexico that not only serves um, those who are in sort of like the business sense, but really creating a better life for everyone. So I know that there's folks watching on Facebook Live and folks here on Zoom, and we have a few more minutes with Kristen. Is there? I would love to have folks ask any questions about this legislation. Um, One of the things that I think I've had the most questions about, Kristen, is around just sort of the cycle, like how does this legislation actually, and you all have a really great graph that I loved at a presentation that we had yesterday, but if you can kind of give an overview of like how does this HFFA, how will this work, how does it work with the CDFI, and I know there's all these acronyms and stuff, but in for like a person who would be navigating this whole process, like a local farmer, what would that process look like for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So it can be complex, and I can share too, and maybe we can post on Facebook that graphic because it's super helpful to walk through. Oh, when you break it down, it's much easier than it sounds. So to start off with, there's the funding for this, right? So there are several pools of funds that we're going to be looking at to capitalize this. One is a state appropriation, right? Because we think it's important for the state to invest in these long-term systemic solutions. Two is that HFFIs are eligible when you're working with a financial institute, which I'll talk about, is that there's a federal HFFI program that opens us up. We have this program to $2 million per year, right, for funding for this. Additionally, foundations, private investors, oftentimes banks and like their community programs will be really interested in this as well. So you're looking at multiple funding sources to make this pot, right? And so in order to get this money to the people, you have to have a few players. So who is involved in this? There's a couple of them. One is a CDFI, which is a Community Development Financial Institute. There are several CDFIs in New Mexico, and we've been talking to a few of them to see who is interested and who would be a really strong partner, with like that is values aligned and that is really ready to see an amazing program like this work. So you have your CDFI who has that expertise in lending and understanding low interest loans and understands the communities, that loan originating, all the financial pieces, right, that most of us aren't like fit to do. So they play a really important role, and they're the ones who are able to tap into those federal HFFI funds. So you have your CDFI partner. You have a state agency. In this case, it's the Economic Development Department here in New Mexico. And then you have a couple of other players. One would be a food access organization like Las Mia, or another organization that understands the ins and outs of HFFIs, that understands what low access areas mean, or low income, or helping with the outreach, the technical assistance, for making sure that our farmers or food hubs or retail outlets are really successful, because that's the long run. That's the long game, right? Like you can pass a policy and put something in place, but you have to really nurture it and cultivate it, and really cultivate those really meaningful relationships, because that's how success happens. And then this act also calls for the creation of, here's another acronym, an Equitable Food Oriented Development, or EFOD, steering committee. So this is a group made up of folks who would be able to tap into these funds. These are farmers, these are BIPOC folks who understand the lived reality and are making sure that this program and this money serves its purpose. Because I think we all know, right, that if something gets passed or funds get used in ways that doesn't really meet its intended purpose, we're back at where we started. So you have these four players who are supporting this fund, originating the loans for these funds, and supporting people building up the pipeline to get this money out to projects. And so then the people who can tap into it are farmers, food producers, food hubs, farm stands, retail outlets, small grocery stores, corner stores that want to retrofit, right, for example, so they can carry fruits and vegetables. They can tap into that. And on a case by case basis, depending on the needs and depending on the situation, um, and the application that is put together by, this team of awesome people, the CDFI and the steering committee, the farmers or business owners will be able to get a financing package essentially, which is maybe it'll be 50% is a low interest loan and the other 50% is a grant, right? Maybe that's the needs of that particular establishment. And then the low interest loan, right? The interest on that will be paid back. And so this will turn into a revolving loan fund essentially. And so the outcomes that you're looking at from this are, increased access to healthy food in a lot of our underserved areas, increased quality jobs. And long term, we're really looking at the increased quality of life for a lot of folks in our communities. So, and then it circles back, right? You have these fantastic outcomes. You have this revolving loan fund that goes back and keeps seeding itself over and over. So that's essentially how it functions.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I think one of the things that I am also really excited about is because I feel like it's also an opportunity for people to reimagine like what their own purpose in life is in terms of their own like creation of their own community wealth. And I know that through some of the work that I'm doing with economic diversification, there are many in rural communities, especially in isolated areas, where you see communities that are they're losing people, they're losing their local economy, and how this could be a really great tool for really rebuilding that. And which is why I've really enjoyed having these conversations this week, because I think it really brings ideas together that one bill isn't going to solve everything. It's going to be multiple bills that and multiple pieces of public policy that bring all the things together. You just need some vision and this ability to be able to reimagine a lot of things. And I feel like this legislation really gets us into this thought process of just challenging sort of the status quo and trying to create something new for New Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those really, I know I always say this, but it's very true that when you have policy things come up and you're looking at root causes and you're starting to look at policies that address root causes, all of a sudden you're not just talking about just food, right? Like there is a need, obviously, for things like emergency food assistance. We have to have that because it's disgraceful to have people going hungry, honestly, right? Like we have to have that. But whenever you start looking at things that are systemic and root cause addressing, like an HFFA, like this bill, you start seeing these effects for so many other things. Because if we're addressing economic inequities, all of a sudden you have kids that are not only well fed, suddenly they're able to do better in schools, and suddenly their families don't have to work two jobs, say, and so there's more quality time spent together, and suddenly you have more connections to family and ancestral traditions and wellness. And so you end up having these ripple effects whenever you really focus on addressing root causes. um, and you're right, there's not one bill that's going to do all of it, but if we start prioritizing bills that really focus more on root cause issues, and we have like 10, 20, 30, 40 bills, and they're really focused on these systemic issues, we have these huge ripple effects that end up just really changing the game and changing what's possible for our state. Because I think we've had this, I think we've talked about this deficit narrative, right, for so long, that the scarcity, like there's not enough. If they have something, then I don't have something. And it doesn't have to be like that, right? Like I think we have a culture here too of this mutual aid and this way of operating that is really abundant. And whenever you throw in things like poverty and hunger and addiction and crime, all of a sudden you it's hard to think expansively. And it's hard to act expansively, right? Because survival is so important. But whenever we start really focusing on root causes, we're able to think more abundantly, and we're able to realize that it's not like a pie and everybody just gets like a little piece. It's this ever expanding thing. Um, so yeah, I think bills like the HFFA and other ones that are really focused on these systems, and really changing the systems that got us into this mess, then we really start changing the entire conversation.
Yeah, no, that's great, Kristen. And for folks who are watching and listening again, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A if you're on Zoom or on comment section on Facebook Live. This legislation is currently being finalized, and we are close to actually having the legislation ready for filing. Tomorrow is the last day to pre-file bills. So if you go to New Mexico to the www.nmlegis.gov, you can start to see all the bills that have already been introduced. This legislation may not be introduced until next week when the session begins. And so really the effort and the work that many of you who are interested in this initiative and what we're trying to accomplish, we will know which committees it'll be assigned to, and that's where the real work. I mean, there's been a lot of really good work already done, but where the real work is in terms of pushing this legislation through the finish line. And so, for folks who are watching, please consider really following and helping us navigate this process by reaching out to your legislator. And then, of course, to the governor, and encourage them to support this legislation when it gets to their committees, and also when it hits the floors in both chambers. As I mentioned earlier, Senator-elect Carrie Hamlin is going to be the one that sponsors it on the Senate side. We expect it to begin in the Senate, and then make its way to the House, where I will be the primary sponsor, with the support of other legislators who are very much also committed and very passionate about this issue. And so with that, Kristen, thanks so much for taking the time tonight. I really appreciate it. And Kristen and I used to ride bikes together pre-COVID. And so hopefully the time will come when we get to do that all again. And so I really appreciate you being here and spending some time here tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Kristen. And thanks everyone again for being a part of this conversation. Next, we are going to be talking about this pharmaceutical board that I am sponsoring in this upcoming legislation. I was actually, folks reached out to me a few weeks ago, and it was really a part of some of the work that that has been promoted in terms of some of the I guess the polling that has been done, and I have Sarah Mans here. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me tonight to talk about this really important piece of legislation. I've learned so much already, and there are things that I just didn't know, and Sarah is going to be so good in terms of articulating what we're trying to accomplish here. But I think for many folks who are watching, this issue is really going to hit home, because I feel like so many of us have at one point or another experienced what it's like to have to decide between like putting food on the table or paying rent, versus getting medication that you absolutely need, but you can't afford because the price is just too expensive. And it's usually because some pharmaceutical company decided that they wanted to profit off of this medication, and the list, and that all it all goes on and on. And so Sarah, I just wanted you to take a moment to introduce yourself, share a little bit about you and your work, and then why this legislation is so important to you, and we can discuss some of the general ideas around what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Mans. I am a New Mexican of 20 years now. I came to New Mexico with my young child because I knew that it'd be the best place in North America to raise her, and it's been fabulous. And I became involved in health equity policy when I became a patient. I was diagnosed with a rare cancer when I was in my late 30s, and $36,000 of prescription medication in a day. That's what my insurance company paid for my treatment. Happily, I was cured. That's great for me. But how do we justify all the costs to the system that are driven by drug pricing? Well, we really can't. So here's the thing that is so tough about drug prices. Has everyone here has been to the pharmacy and been surprised when the pharmacist says that's going to be $220? That's going to be $19. And it seems random. It seems like, wait a minute, this inhaler used to be $20 and now it's $600. This EpiPen was $19 and now it's $549. And it all has to go against my deductible before my insurance starts paying. Well, our pricing in this country for pharmaceuticals is absolutely bonkers. It's really, really complicated. And one of the things that Kristen said that I think is really important to keep in mind about drug pricing as well is it's complicated on purpose, and it was complicated by the people who benefit from having it not make any sense to us, the patients, or to our doctors. So when we look at this entire system, what we see is we've got a whole bunch of actors who are for-profit entities. These aren't, one of the most important things I learned when I was first learning about this issue as an advocate rather than as a patient was the following statement. These aren't bad people. I mean, big pharma jacks up prices and just gouges people at the pharmacy counter for the medications we need to live healthy, long lives because they can. They're the only cost center in your healthcare system that is completely unregulated. If you think about it, if your dad went in for a hip replacement and the people who make the actual replacement hip could just charge whatever they wanted to, and Medicare had to pay it, well, that'd be a $14 million hip, right? So drugs kind of work the same way. These aren't bad people. They're arguably not even doing anything wrong. And the reason is that the purpose of Gilead Pharmaceuticals is not to provide the sustaining medications that people with HIV need in order to be able to live to be old. The purpose of Gilead Pharmaceuticals is to make money for shareholders. And the problem is, since we don't regulate them at all, there's no motive for them to look at how they can grow their revenue to make shareholders happy, except by charging more for the drugs people need. And the terrible thing is, they're doing it with generics now too. It's not just a new drug that it's cost us all this money to research this, and so it's super important, and we gotta get back what we spent investing in a new cure for cancer. It's the drugs that have been around a real long time, and they slap a new label on it and say it's now the 12-hour pill instead of the 24, whatever. Take two of them, they're small, and all of a sudden it's now back in status where they can just reset the price. So that's part of the complication, is that there's no regulation on these companies, and so they price gouge because they're there to make money. The other piece of the problem is that who pays them is so flippin' complicated. Sometimes it's covered by your insurance if it's on the formulary and your insurance has negotiated with the pharmacy benefit manager, which is a company that gets between your insurance plan and the drug manufacturer and the wholesaler. And they work out this program of maybe you're going to get a rebate at the counter. Maybe there's going to be a coupon. Maybe you're going to pay the retail price. So it's confusing on purpose. It's complicated on purpose. And there is no way to regulate this at the level where the problem is occurring, other than simply saying to these companies, you know what, all you can charge for insulin in New Mexico is, I think it's now $25. So Health Action New Mexico, the organization that is working on this bill and working on the New Mexico Consumers for Affordable Prescriptions campaign, supporting that, they got an insulin cap price through last year. That was a big lift. It was really, really hard to do. But when you tell people, I need this medication to live, my pancreas doesn't make it. And it went from being $5 a vial to $225 a vial. And the only way to regulate that is to say to the pharmaceutical companies, in New Mexico, no one pays more than X. And we just won't let you do it because they're licensed by the pharmaceutical board. This is a place where we can interfere in the pricing, in that price spiral where prices seem to always be going upward on drugs. So insulin is just an example. And so Health Action worked on that and got that through last year, and then said, I wonder, could we do this with other drugs that are exorbitantly overpriced, that people need, that are critical to their health? What if we chose a group of drugs every year and had a board and have them look at these prices and say, well, how do you justify this price? You just went from, you just increased the price by 700%. What's the reason for that? And then if they don't have any reason, if there's no market-based reason for it, like the cost of our ingredients went up, whatever, things can happen. But if there's no justification for it, then the board will simply set a price that this is how much New Mexico consumers pay for this drug. And so the idea of a prescription drug affordability board is one that has been in kind of under policy development for about 7 years now. 2 states have implemented them, and there are 13 other states in which a bill has been filed to try to get a prescription drug affordability board to cap the costs to you of certain drugs. We are really optimistic that we can get this done in New Mexico. Reasons being, we have a legislature that is full of people who care about the lives of their constituents because they're volunteers. They're doing this because they want to. And they're engaged with problems and they want to seek solutions that actually work. So we're optimistic in that regard. We think it's politically possible that this can be done. And we also think that this is an issue that there's a lot of demand for. We did a little bit of polling, and almost half of New Mexicans have either not paid for something else they needed, like rent or groceries, or have left a pharmaceutical, they've left a drug at the counter at the pharmacy because they could not afford to leave with it. That's outrageous. That should never happen. Your doctor thinks you need that medication. It's been prescribed to you, and you walk up there and they filled it for you, and now you can't afford it. That's just wrong. And so we're really optimistic that this is a problem that we can solve, and that there's a way to kind of get some daylight in here that fixes some of the other parts of our system that are still broken, even now that we have the ACA, even now that we have the Medicaid expansion. There's still some work to do here, and the Prescription Drug Affordability Board is a piece of that work. So. Yeah.
And thanks, Sarah, for that, because I think for folks who are watching, it's important for them to really understand and that in the way that your utilities are regulated, that you make sure that like for us here in New Mexico, in southern New Mexico, El Paso Electric doesn't our rates don't skyrocket in the same way with PNM up north, for example. That's really the same familiar framework that we're thinking about that this board would do as well in terms of drugs that many folks depend on. And I think one of the things that also Kristen mentioned that I think is very much a part of why I chose to really focus on these pieces of legislation is because every single person, every single New Mexican, everyone on this planet has health. Like this is the thing that we all have in common, in the same way we have food in common, that we need nourishment to survive. We also need also need good health to survive. And when you hear these statistics, and that was the thing that really led me to decide to sponsor this legislation, is that when you have 50% of New Mexicans who are having to choose between leaving their prescriptions behind because they can't afford it, I think is really problematic over time, not only for the person's health, but also even just the consequences of what comes with all of that. And these are sort of the same sort of narratives that I'm hearing even with just paid sick leave. And when you have essential workers who are having to choose between staying home because they're sick or because of their paycheck, like many are going to work sick, and it doesn't do anything for the business who is employing them and the customers that are going through, in the same way that we can no longer it's not safe for so many people to go without their medication. And so this is why this affordability board is so critical for how we proceed and do the big picture work that we need to do here in the state of New Mexico. And so I think for one of the folks who have been listening, I know that today someone commented on an article. So we did an op-ed. It came out in the Albuquerque Journal yesterday, and there's a gentleman who shared on my Facebook page about some of the circumstances that they have had to endure in terms of having to deal with the affordability of their meds. And so I ask for folks who are a part of, who have experienced these types of situations, that you please reach out, that you please share your stories, and that when the time comes that that this legislation is up for debate in the New Mexico State Legislature, that that you please participate in public comment, especially during these times when everything will be done virtually. Because your stories are going to be what really makes the difference. I know that with the insulin bill from last year, I mean, I think that's what really moved people to act and to support the legislation, is because of the countless stories that people shared about what it meant for them to have this price cap on insulin, especially in a state where so many folks are battling issues related to like diabetes and just trying to regulate that. And so in the same way, those stories are critical for folks in across the board who are on medication. And so, Sarah, what are some other ways that folks can really participate in I guess this call to action? I know that there's a campaign strategy that you all have been working on that is really starting to gear up. Is there any specific information that folks should know as we move forward into the legislative session?
Thank you. This is actually something that I think we should really be open about. Our legislators really want to hear from us, and they want to understand what problems we're facing. And I think that this is an issue on which people's personal stories are going to make the difference in really getting this bill over the line and helping to change New Mexico's policy about this issue. So if you have been affected by it and you would be willing to share your story, our website is New Mexico CAP, C-A-P, Coalition for Affordable Prescriptions.org, NewMexicoCAP.org. And if you would be willing to go there and type a little bit, or even just give us your name and number, there's a place there that says share your story. We are collecting those stories because we're hoping to work with some folks who are affected by this issue to help you to develop a story that will really help our legislators to understand how this issue affects you and how they can make a difference.
And for folks who are listening, as someone who's a community organizer and has been doing community organizing work for a very long time, and now a legislator, please don't underestimate the power that your story has. And I share that with you all because sometimes I think we elevate legislators and policymakers in a way that we think that there's absolutely no way that my story is going to impact. But I've seen it time and time again where we have had policymakers who we knew were probably going to oppose legislation, and there was stories upon stories that a legislator has heard and has listened to that completely changed their mind. And you see this transformation in, and you sometimes even create an activist within this legislator who never even realized that this would be the thing that they would be championing. And so I certainly want to just encourage people to never feel like your story doesn't matter, because in many cases it will, and it does. And if there's any legislative session in which your story will be that much more critical, it's this one, because um, I know that folks are kind of worried about interaction and the including people in this conversation. I actually think that this is an incredible opportunity for New Mexicans who rarely get to make it up to Santa Fe and follow what's happening up there in the New Mexico State Legislature. That now that we are fully going to be 100% digital or virtual in the House, that and then we might have translation, which is even more incredible, is that this is really something that is a great opportunity for so many people to really not only stay engaged, but to really make this what I think is going to be a very transformational legislative session. And so with that, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. I know that it's only been just a few weeks that we've had a chance to really work on this legislation, but I've learned so much from you and from the work that you all are doing, and it's something that I'm really hopeful and excited to work with you all on.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to work with a legislator who is truly interested in how we can use political power to solve problems. It's really fun. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Well, cool. Well, thank you all so much. For folks who are interested in learning more about the legislative session, I'll provide you all with some feedback. I know that there's been a lot of questions in terms of our health and safety, both our health and safety, but also just security. I know that there's folks who are really concerned about what may or may not occur in the legislature next year as we go out and legislate. There are precautions being made in preparation for this session to be sure that everybody's being safe, both all of the legislators, public, press, and the media. And so so all those precautions are being made. We are scheduled, as I mentioned, under the Constitution, we have to be there on Tuesday. We will be there on Tuesday, and we will vote and change the rules in the Senate to go virtual. And then many of us, like myself, will be returning home. I will be here in Las Cruces during the entire legislative session, and we will be operating all virtual. And so that is going to be a big piece for a lot of us, that we're just going to have to try to really navigate this whole thing in a new way. And so I encourage everyone to please participate, do what you can. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can reach out to me on my Facebook at facebook.com/RubioNM35. You can follow me on Twitter at ANRubio. You can also follow me on Instagram at radically rogue Rubio. And you can also contact me directly on my cell phone. My cell phone information is public, as well as my email address, which is angelica@rubionm35.com. And so with that, everyone, thank you so much. I started these town halls on Sunday and have had one every night this week in hopes to really capture the spirit of my bike rides up north to Santa Fe, which unfortunately I was not able to participate in this year. But I've really enjoyed all of the conversations that we've had this week with all of the different people who have been helping me really champion a lot of the issues that so many of our communities are being impacted with or by. And so I'm looking forward to this upcoming session and all the things we'll have a chance to accomplish. Please, again, feel free to reach out. Don't hesitate in doing so. And if there's stories that you want to share regarding any of the issues that I have presented on this week, please send them to me, because they not only will they inspire me to really work that much harder on in the nights where we're going to have really long days, like really long nights in front of Zoom, but that we can really inspire other legislators to really think transformatively. And that's really my hope for this upcoming session. So with that, everyone, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And please be safe out there, wear your mask, and we will talk to you soon.